Ever wonder what happens when the world's most elite hitman breaks his own code? Today, we will recap the movie, The Mechanic, a masterclass hitman movie where Jason Statham brings his signature intensity as Arthur Bishop, a lethal assassin who makes every kill look like an accident until one mission gets way too personal. Enjoy the story. The movie opens in Colombia, where a private plane lands at an airport. Moments later, a man named Jorge is transported out by a convoy of his men. During the journey, they encounter a roadblock, which his guards swiftly manage. The convoy continues on its way until they arrive at Jorge's luxurious mansion. He then enters his impressive home, walking through its magnificent interior, and soon heads to his indoor pool for a swim. As he swims, he spots one of his watches at the bottom of the pool. However, when he dives to retrieve it, he is attacked by a man wearing a breathing mask who is waiting for him underwater. The assailant holds Jorge beneath the water, drowning him while maintaining complete control. When Jorge's body becomes still, his guard watches, but he is eventually convinced that his boss is still swimming, thanks to the hitman's clever manipulation. The assassin then releases the body and makes a swift escape, revealing himself as Arthur Bishop. Soon after Jorge's body is discovered, his armed men rush into the house in a panic. Now, disguised as a chef, Arthur manages to evade their detection and swiftly changes into a new set of clothes. Outside, Jorge's people gather around his lifeless body, still unable to believe their boss is dead. Meanwhile, Arthur escapes the mansion and heads for a nearby bridge. He then jumps off the bridge into the waters, where he swims to a hidden boat waiting for him as he makes his escape. In New Orleans, Louisiana, Arthur is seen arriving at a dock after a long drive. He boards a boat after giving the dockman, Henry, a bottle of wine, and then he sails through the waters as night falls. Eventually, he docks the boat and heads to his secret home. Inside the house, Arthur opens a concealed compartment on the wall, revealing photographs and documents of various targets. His meticulous work as a hitman is showcased as he always studies their profiles and carefully orchestrates their killings to appear either accidental or as the work of someone else. Arthur later goes back to town where he meets Henry again. This time he handed him some money, which was payment for his services. Arthur then drives off to meet Harry McKenna, a seasoned criminal figure who has brought along 2 guards for their meeting. Arthur confirms that his recent job, Jorge's assassination, has been completed, and Harry compliments him on his professionalism. However, he teased that Arthur could use some friends in his life. With the payment for the hit secured, Arthur drives off. The next morning, Arthur returns home and begins preparing for his next target. However, his assignment takes a bad turn when he's instructed to eliminate his close friend Harry. Conflicted, Arthur decides to meet with his employers to discuss the situation. He is eventually flown out to a neutral location, where he meets Dean, the head of the organization. During their walk, Dean explains that a high-profile hit in Africa had gone wrong. The operation had taken 6 months to plan. Unfortunately, the entire team was killed due to a leak. Dean says only 2 people had access to the job's details, Harry and himself. To make matters worse, Harry had transferred $20 million to an offshore account, leading Dean to believe that Harry betrayed them. Dean eventually gives Arthur 48 hours to kill Harry, or they will find someone else to handle the job. The next day, as Harry heads to his office with his guards, Arthur conducts his own investigation and eventually realizes that Dean's story checks out. Harry had indeed betrayed the organization. Torn between loyalty and duty, Arthur calls Harry and warns him that they are coming for him. He advises Harry that in order to escape, he needs to cut the building's power and make his way to the elevator lobby. With precise timing, Arthur directs Harry through the building over the phone, leading him to the basement. When he arrives, Harry eventually discovers his van is damaged and beyond use. Soon, Arthur steps out of the shadows, and after seeing him, Harry admits that he knows Arthur is there to kill him because of the failed African mission. Rather than trying to escape, Harry assists Arthur in staging the killing as a carjacking gone wrong. Harry pulls out his gun and shoots at his own vehicle to help create the illusion. When Arthur asks why Harry didn't run or defend himself, Harry responds that he'd rather die at Arthur's hand than someone else's. With a heavy heart, Arthur shoots his friend, feeling the weight of the betrayal heavy on him. At Harry's funeral, Arthur meets Harry's son, Steve. After offering his condolences, Arthur prepares to leave. However, Steve asks him for a ride. During their drive, Arthur tries to reassure Steve that Harry did care about him, even if they weren't close. When they arrived, Steve invites him inside as he tells him that the house is soon to be repossessed by the bank due to his father's bank loans. Steve reveals that he isn't touching a dollar from his father's estate, expressing his disgust at the situation. As Arthur turns to leave, Steve asks a haunting question. What kind of person kills someone in a wheelchair? Gutted by the question, Arthur walks away in silence. Later, Steve is seen mourning and depressed as he destroys parts of the house in frustration. Later that night, Steve sat in a car which was parked in a dangerous part of town. Moments later, a man approaches him, initially offering to help, but quickly pulls a gun on Steve in an attempt to steal his car. Steve remains unfazed. He had actually parked there hoping to lure out the carjackers who killed his father. In the end, Steve brutally beats the man, hitting him repeatedly until the point where it looks like he's about to kill him. Just as Steve is about to deliver the final blow, Arthur appears out of nowhere and stops him. He then takes control of the situation, letting the injured man go and putting Steve in the car. The next day, Arthur attends to some business in his workshop and then heads out to do some shopping. During this trip, Steve spots him from a distance and goes to talk to him. He strikes up a conversation as he is eager to learn from Arthur, and he eventually asks Arthur if he can train him to become a hitman. Arthur firmly tells him no and heads back to the dock. That night, Arthur reflects on a photograph of his late friend Harry and ends up calling Steve. He gives him a time and location to meet up the next day, suggesting he has had a rethink. When they meet, Arthur reveals the truth to Steve. He is a mechanic, a hitman who solves problems for people. Arthur doesn't sugarcoat the nature of his work, telling Steve that being a hitman isn't an easy life. It requires a particular mindset, with no room for revenge or personal emotions. The two then adopt a dog, and Arthur uses it as part of his unconventional training, emphasizing that patience and focus are essential in their line of work. The following day, Arthur gives Steve his first task. Take the dog to a coffee shop, order a black coffee, sit by the window, and do Sudoku puzzles every day for 3 weeks. Alongside this, Arthur takes Steve to the gun range daily, helping him perfect his shooting skills. Arthur also gives him an insurance book filled with common causes of death, which Arthur wants him to study carefully. Eventually, Steve loses his house and car to the bank and Arthur lets him stay at his place. Over time, Steve becomes a skilled marksman with impeccable accuracy, and he impresses Arthur with his progress. Once Steve has reached a certain level of proficiency, Arthur takes him to the next stage of training, which involves going to a trap house. There, they meet an arms dealer. As Arthur hands the dealer a list of weapons, he suddenly kills the man in front of Steve, demonstrating firsthand what it takes to be a hitman. The lesson is clear. It's not just about pulling the trigger, but understanding the moral implications of the job. They then return to Arthur's place, where Arthur shows Steve his hidden wall of targets and explains that the arms dealer they just killed was selling weapons to anyone, regardless of the consequences. Arthur then introduces their next target, a man named Burke, who works as a hitman for another organization and frequents the coffee shop where Steve has been training. Burke has a peculiar obsession with chihuahuas, which is why Arthur insisted on getting a dog. He also liked boys. Their plan works perfectly, and Steve is invited for a drink by Burke. Arthur had prepared a lethal dose of poison for Steve to use, but when the opportunity arises, Steve decides against using it. He pockets the poison, thanks Burke for the drink, and tries to leave, but Burke chases after him, offering him a ride home. Ignoring Arthur's advice, Steve accepts the ride and is driven to Burke's lavish mansion. At the mansion, when Burke makes advances on him, Steve tries to replicate what Arthur did to the arms dealer, but things go wrong. Burke is much stronger and more experienced, and the two engage in a brutal fight. Burke overpowers Steve, beating him senseless, but Steve manages to grab a screwdriver and stab Burke multiple times. Even though Burke continues to fight, Steve ultimately kills him after delivering several more blows. Arthur isn't pleased with the unnecessary mess and aggression Steve displayed. However, Steve was happy that he got the job done. The next day, Arthur retrieves a package from the airport, which contains money and a phone. He calls the number, and Dean answers and expresses his dissatisfaction that Arthur used an outsider for the recent mission. However, Dean insists that the next assignment is of high priority and must be completed as soon as possible. Arthur receives the new target's details and hangs up the phone. Back at his place, he and Steve go over the documents. The target is a man who has made millions by running fraudulent churches and fake programs, effectively operating a cult. Steve comments on how morally corrupt the target is, and the two devise a plan to kill him using adrenaline. As they prepare, Steve reveals that one of the man's victims had left the target's Bible group and was eventually found dead just days later. Soon, we see the target check into a hotel, and Arthur and Steve begin their mission. They scale the building from the outside and place cameras throughout the target's room, monitoring his movements. They watch the target eating and going to sleep, so the duo climbs back up the building to make their move. However, when the doctor arrives to give the target medication, Arthur notices that the new drug would counteract the adrenaline they planned to use, forcing them to change their plan. Once the doctor leaves, Arthur and Steve sneak into the room and improvise, killing the target quickly. As they make their escape, Steve accidentally kicks a bolt, which falls through the vent, and this catches the guards' attention. Arthur and Steve are immediately caught in a shootout as they flee, with Arthur taking out several guards barehanded, while Steve skillfully kills 3 more. The duo eventually hook up their lines and jump off the building while being fired at. After landing in a room on another floor, they split up at the reception to avoid suspicion. Arthur later goes to the airport. There he spots a man who was presumed dead from the failed African mission. He follows the man onto a bus and confronts him about what really happened in Africa. The man reveals that Dean paid him a large sum of money to kill the rest of the team. He laughs at Arthur for being gullible to Dean's lies. Soon, a fight breaks out between Arthur and the hitman, and though the battle is difficult in the confined space of the bus, Arthur manages to throw him off, where the man is hit by a passing car. Arthur then returns to the dock where he discovers that Henry is missing. Moments later, armed men arrive and they search for Arthur. He initially hides in the water before revealing himself and swiftly shooting them. Then, he sees Henry's body floating in the water, and realizing what was playing out, he calls Dean, telling him that he's coming for him. Arthur boards his boat back home and calls Steve, but quickly realizes something is wrong. Staying calm, he informs Steve, who was surrounded by Dean's men, that there's a gun hidden in the couch. After the call, Steve swiftly retrieves the gun and opens fire at the hitmen surrounding him, killing them all. Once the immediate threat is handled, Arthur returns and tells Steve to grab a few boxes as they prepare to deal with Dean's security. However, during this process, Steve finds his father's gun among Arthur's belongings, but keeps this discovery to himself for the moment. As they drive toward Dean's location, Steve asks Arthur if he ever thinks about the people he has killed. Arthur responds that he doesn't dwell on it. However, Steve presses further, subtly asking whether Arthur was responsible for his father's death. Arthur admits that he has killed people he knew in the past and feels deep regret for it afterward. Despite this emotional conversation, they proceed to one of Dean's security guards' houses. Upon arrival, they shoot the guard and corner his family. Arthur, who is determined to get answers, grabs the guard's daughter and pretends to threaten her to get her father to talk. However, after getting the necessary information, Arthur reveals it was all a prank and he had used some meat instead of the girl's hand. Arthur then calls Dean and learns that Harry's contract was worth $50 million. Dean offers Arthur $10 million to walk away, but Arthur rejects the offer, and this makes Dean laugh at the idea of a hitman suddenly developing a conscience. Moments later, Dean realizes that Arthur is in the building, and he immediately orders his men to eliminate him. In preparation for the impending gunfight, Arthur and Steve plant a camera at the building's entrance. Arthur observes from a distance as Steve hijacks a bus and begins driving toward Dean's convoy as he tries to escape. As soon as Arthur spots Dean's car leaving, he speeds toward it. He ran his car into one of the convoys, opened fire at the men, and then took over another truck, which he also ran into the other convoy. At this time, Steve rams the bus straight into the convoy in front, cutting off any route of escape. There was an explosion and Arthur finally runs the truck into Dean's car, killing the driver. His car tumbled over with Dean barely making it out alive. Then, both Steve and Arthur emptied their bullets on him, ensuring their mission is complete. With Dean dead, Arthur tells Steve they need to disappear and suggests they could do it together if Steve is willing. While driving away, Steve reaches for some water, and Arthur notices Harry's gun with him. They stop at a gas station, and when Steve fills up the car, Arthur apologizes for everything Steve has been through. But Steve played the apology down and offered to grab snacks for them in the gas station mart. However, just before leaving, he turns the petrol pump toward the car and begins walking away. At a safe distance, Steve pulls out his father's gun and shoots at the car, triggering a massive explosion that kills Arthur. Steve returns to Arthur's place, sits on the couch, and plays a song on the music player. He then gets into Arthur's car in the garage and drives away. The car suddenly stopped halfway, and Steve noticed a note on the seat. It was from Arthur, who told him that if Steve was driving the car, then it means Steve is already dead. Steve laughed, but as he tried to restart the car, a bomb was triggered, causing it to explode into a fireball. At the same time, the music back at Arthur's house triggers a fire, and the house is immediately engulfed in flames. Meanwhile, back at the gas station, security footage reveals that Arthur had escaped the car before it exploded. Despite the blast, Arthur is alive, proving once again that it takes more than an ordinary act to kill the legendary hitman. And that is the recap of the movie, The Mechanic. If you enjoyed the recap, consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.